Hello and welcome to Sewing with Threads, the monthly podcast with the staff of Threads magazine. I'm your host, Carol Frasia, and I'm joined by my colleague, Janine Clegg. Hi, Janine.
Hi, Carol.
Our guest today is a favorite with us and with our readers and our listening audience. It's contributing editor Kenneth D. King. Kenneth is a couture designer in New York. Hello, Kenneth. He's also an adjunct professor in haute couture at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, and he teaches private students at his Manhattan studio. As a designer, he has seen his custom pieces worn by celebrities and preserved in major museum collections, including the Victoria and Albert in London and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. If you've admired Elton John's embellished hats, the ones that look like super fancy flight caps, you have Kenneth to thank for those. In addition to his millinery work, Kenneth has designed jewelry, lots of custom couture garments, and sewn many pairs of fabulous jeans. But what we're here to talk about today is his expertise in tailoring. Kenneth is a featured instructor in Smart Tailoring, which is part of Thread's growing library of e-learning classes. You can find out more about the class in the show notes. It's an in-depth look at tailoring techniques, both traditional and updated. So welcome, Kenneth, and I hope you're ready to talk about tailoring with us.
Well, thank you. I am. I'm so looking forward to this. So, questions. Tell me what you need to know.
Well, part one is, my first question is, there are 23 chapters in this class of yours, and what you do in the class is do a comparison between what you call old school tailoring and new school tailoring. And I'd like to know if you can give us just a quick overview of what the difference is between those two approaches to doing tailoring.
Okay. Well, to talk about how I came up with the new school tailoring ideas. When I first started my business, when customers started demanding dinner jackets, I did a lot of study. One of the books that I recommend is the Adele Margolis tailoring book. Then there is the Cabral book. But I wanted to understand what old world tailoring was. And I also understood that I needed to make it much more efficient because I wanted to actually make some money doing this. So the new school tailoring is looking at why one does something in old school tailoring, like, for example, putting in the canvas. The object there is not to get the canvas caught into the seam because the seams won't press flat. So in the new school tailoring, I show how to frame the canvas with a thin muslin so that the muslin hangs the canvas inside the garment, giving you the same result, a nice flat seam that presses flat. So at every stage in the series, I talk about the old school way, the new school way, and I think putting everything side by side enables you to pick and choose. You could choose to, say, install the lining new school, which is a lot more time efficient, or install the lining the old-fashioned way. So they both aim at the same result, a quality product that is sound construction, but the new school is a lot more efficient.
So
I'm sorry, Carol. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Janine.
Well, I was wondering, you talked about the time issue just now, and I'm wondering, time-wise, does one take less time than the other?
Absolutely. The new school, if I'm making a shawl lapel jacket, for example, in the new school, if I get all my cutting done in one day, I can construct the entire thing in one day with no fusibles. So doing the same with the old school tailoring would take me about a week. So it is, and this is really why I had to come up with this particular new school set of methods, because as someone said to me, you can charge $3,000 for a jacket. Do you want to make $3,000 in a day, or do you want to make $3,000 in a week? So that gives you an example of the time differential.
And you mentioned that you don't use fusibles in your new school tailoring. Is that sort of across the board? You prefer not to?
Well, that is sort of the exception is setting in welt pockets, because you really need to solidify that particular area. But the idea of either block fusing or using fusible canvas. Sorry, I live next to a firehouse. It's it's good ready to wear construction, but I construct for a 25-year useful life. And where that came from, having my pieces in museum collections. Curators say that generally they come out of someone's wardrobe after 25 years and go into a museum. So I want that garment to look well, clear up to the time it goes into the museum.
You just answered one of my questions, which was, what is the lifespan of old school tailoring versus new school? Is it about the same?
It's about the same. It really is. The old school is a little stiffer. It's a little more rigid. If you were kind of comparing wearability, a new school is a little more limber. So what I find is that some of my lady customers like the new school a little better because it's not quite so stiff.
Now, for a sewer who is maybe coming at this at a sort of intermediate skill level of sewing, would one or the other of these approaches be more advisable and easier to manage?
The new school, definitely. I recently just finished my first Zoom class on the half-line shawl lapel jacket, and there was a lot of new school in there. And so an intermediate sewer could handle the new school quite well.
Is there a spot in all of this tailoring that a lot of people get hung up, or they have to stop because it's a particularly difficult area? I don't know whether it's the vent on the sleeve or attaching the canvas. Is there a spot where you have found your students or other folks have trouble?
Not really. I would say installing the sleeve, and that's more of a fit issue rather than a construction issue, because you need to get the pitch of the sleeve right. You need to get the sleeve cap right. And in the video, I talk about cap ease, for example. And I have found if you need like the golden rule number on cap ease, I like to an inch to inch and a quarter cap ease so that the armhole on the sleeve measures an inch and a quarter more than the bodice. I have found that's my go-to number. If it's a wool crepe or a linen tweed, you could go up to an inch and a half, but inch to inch and a quarter is the golden rule. So if they hew towards that, and that kind of goes back to the pattern they're looking at, if they can get the cap ease right, then the sleeve just drops right into the armhole.
I know that you start out talking about how to adjust the pattern a little bit for the two different types of construction, but are your methods pretty adaptable to most standard jacket patterns?
Yes.
Aside from the adjustments.
Yes. Well, what we do is I assume a well-fitting jacket body. So from there, how I learned it in my pattern making training was the linings, the facings, the front canvas, the back stay, all of that is formula. So any jacket that comes, if you get it to fit, any jacket that comes out of any envelope is going to be a candidate for this kind of tailoring.
And it sounds like you would recommend people follow these methods rather than what the pattern instructions say for
Honestly,
something that's going to really last them a long time.
Yes. I don't want to diss the pattern companies or anything, but, I have found, just because I've been sewing, I started my business back in 1987. I've been sewing professionally for over 40 years. These are things that I know work. And when I teach a class, what I aim for is repeatable and reliable. So the techniques outlined in this particular series are repeatable and reliable. If you just follow them as shown, you're going to have success.
Kenneth, can you use these? Sorry, Carol, I keep interrupting you.
No, go ahead.
Can you use these on knits also?
No.
Are these methods? Okay.
Well, I can't answer that categorically because I, as a rule, don't sew with knits.
Right.
I would imagine if you used a Ponte or a really solid double knit, it would work quite well. But anything, because for me, the idea of a knit, that's a completely different kind of garment. This is a garment that has more structure. When you have a knit, you need to factor in, okay, is your lining going to stretch as well? So using knits kind of opens up a can of worms that I don't care to open up.
Well, it really is lovely in the wool. And do you recommend people go with 100% wool, or can they choose blends?
Well, I prefer either 100% wool, silk, cotton, natural fibers. But at the same time, if you really look at some of the lint and tweeds, those aren't entirely 100% wool because they have things in them like cellophane. So I guess the thing would be, is the fabric malleable enough to, say, take the ease on a sleeve cap? That really would be what I would look at. So I tend not to stand on principle and say you can never, ever use anything with any kind of blend. I don't think that's wise. I think use the fabric that makes you happy.
Well, you were also talking about structure, and that new school is a little more of a supple structure than old school. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a sort of a rundown of the different materials that you would use in each? And are any of them going to be difficult for people to get their hands on?
Well, the understructure materials are fairly commonplace. Muslin, thin muslin, you can get that anywhere. The tailoring canvas, there are plenty of different places that you can get tailoring canvas. You hear people call it Hymo. Hymo is actually a brand. If you're in doubt, I would say go with a thinner rather than a heavier canvas. It's going to give you a lighter weight, more supple garment. But really, the materials that I use are fairly commonplace. You may have to order them online from one of the purveyors, but you can get them. They're not rare.
Yeah, well, that's actually good advice about looking for a lighter weight canvas, because when I've looked to order Hymo or whatever, if you type in Hymo, you can get that. It'll come up. But there's often different levels of it, and I never really know what I'm going to be needing to use. So it sounds like if you start light, that you will be maybe happier than...
Yes, I think so. Now, as far as, because people have asked me also kind of in relation, Janine, to your question, like what kinds of fabrics work best with this particular, the tailoring. I have used, aside from wools, I really started using the new school methods with fabrics like moirés, jacquards, those kinds of fabrics. I would interline them with either a cotton flannelette or a seri cotton, and cotton flannelette especially. Will make a sleeve cap ease beautifully. But these techniques work with those fabrics as well as the traditional, what you consider tailoring fabrics like the wools.
Oh, so is there pad stitching in new school?
You can use pad stitching. Now, I would not recommend the pad stitching for, say, a jacquard or, a fabric like that. But yes, there are a couple of ways to handle the new school. There's machine sewing the roll line tape, but also if you want a little extra beef, pad stitching is useful for the new school as well as the old school.
And then the other question that I think is probably on the minds of some people out there: how much hand sewing is involved in new school versus old school?
Well, there's more in the old school, obviously, because of the pad stitching, if you choose to leave that off in the new school. I hand sew my linings in. There's this technique called bagging a lining, and I'm pretty damn good, but I can never get those things to turn out right. For me, when they say, well, it's quicker. No, actually, it's quicker for me to just sew it in by hand, because generally the times I've tried to bag a lining, I've ended up taking it out and hand sewing it in. So there's going to be hand sewing of the linings, hand sewing of the cuff, the lining cuff to the sleeve cuff. But most people...
Well, you certainly have more control with hand sewing. And I have to say, watching the video, it's pretty soothing and really nice to watch you do the hand sewing, because you do it so well and so quickly, and I wish that I could do it that well.
Well, it's all practice.
Thank you.
But the hand, a lot of people, my students at FIT sometimes get kind of bunched up about hand sewing. And I say to them, there are times people will turn themselves inside out to try to sew it by machine when you could have had it sewn by hand and it will be just as strong. And as far as just hand sewing, the optimum length of the thread should be from your hand to your elbow. And that way, that will enable you to get a good rhythm when you're sewing. And that's why my hand sewing may look like I do it very quickly, because I'm not dealing with a long thread.
Do you wax the thread?
Now, I know I'm going to be committing heresy when I say this, but no. Waxing thread, no, seriously. Well, waxing thread is good to say. Waxing thread is something, if you were using a cotton thread or if you were using, say, a silk thread, waxing thread is a good idea. And I would wax it, then I would iron it so the wax would soak into the fibers. With polyester thread, which is what I tend to use, I don't wax it, but I do iron the thread. Because if you put wax on a polyester thread, it doesn't have anywhere to go. It will not absorb in. So I have found that ironing the thread, and I had a student have the best idea, like the flat irons for your hair. Because see, I don't have any hair, so it never occurred to me to look at that in that. But she said she uses a flat iron. She has it on her table, and she just runs her threads through the flat iron. But it takes the twist out, and it makes it so it doesn't snarl as you're sewing the stitches.
Perfect.
Yeah. Do you have a preference for polyester, or is it that it is affordable and available in every color? And
well, I like polyester because going back to the 25-year useful life, cotton depends and silk depend on a certain percent of humidity on the molecular level. I know that sounds like it's in the weeds, but that's how it was explained. And so that's why why cotton thread rots, because unless it's washed or kept in a proper humidity, it's not going to remain strong. Polyester, as we know, is forever. And since I want my garments to last that 25 years so that they can get to a museum, I sew almost exclusively with polyester thread.
That's a really good tip. I had not heard it ever described that way. I mean, polyester thread is so easily available, and I don't have any problem with it either. But I think there's, times when cotton thread makes a nicer top stitching thread because it has less shine sometimes.
Well,
but
there is a thread called Gutermann Mara 30, which is my go-to top stitching thread now. And it's polyester. Okay. It has just the right amount of sheen, not too shiny, not too matte. Just really, really a great top stitching thread for buttonholes as well. Now, another little thing, another little tip with polyester thread, and this is something that people have said I'm full of beans, but really I'm not. When you're winding your bobbin with polyester thread, wind it slowly or wind it. I hold the thread in my hands instead of putting it on the tension disc, because you can stretch the thread going onto the bobbin. And have you ever sewn a seam and pressed it and it looks great, and then 3 days later it's puckered? That's because the polyester thread has snapped back.
Right. It's twisted more, right?
Well, it's more elastic, and so if it goes on the bobbin with a little bit of tension or a little too much tension, then it's going to snap back to its original length. So to avoid that, it's one of those things that just as a matter of habit, I hold the thread as I'm winding it so that there's enough tension so it winds smoothly, but not so much tension that it's going to stretch.
Yeah, that's Judy Newcomb says the same thing.
Yes.
Our other contributing editor has also talked about that, how the bobbin applies extra tension to your bobbin winding, adds tension, and it can cause puckered seams. So it's a good thing to keep in mind if you've experienced that. Yeah, I have one more question, one final question before we say goodbye, because we need to finish up. Is there a way to do, and I think you may have answered this, to do a hybrid version of old school and new school, or is it just not working?
No, absolutely. And that's why we show them kind of together. For example, I would do, say, a new school installation of canvas, but I would do an old school installation of lining and sleeve lining. You can kind of play back and forth to decide what effect you want. And so what I would encourage people to do is make a jacket with the new school, make a jacket with the old school, so they can kind of compare. But after, and there are certain garments that I do these days where I do a hybrid of both of them. So it's good to have, really, it's sort of like if you have different techniques at your disposal, you can evaluate situation by situation which one is going to give you the best result.
That's great. That's really good advice. I think I hope people have time to work their way through, to take the class and try both jackets. I think about it like I have no time to do any sewing now, but I'm very tempted to do both. And I know that if you teach classes also, Kenneth, both Sit and Sew and around the country, where you lead people through some construction of garments and coats and things. So if anybody wants to work with Kenneth in person.
I also do Zoom classes.
Oh, in Zoom classes, yes. So you can find Kenneth that way too. So you can warm up with his video class and then go and show off how good you are when you meet him in person.
Good.
That's it for our time today. But thank you so much for talking to us, Kenneth.
My pleasure.
And thank you for doing such a clear, concise video on the tailoring. I found it to be very easy to watch and to learn from. And I think others will have the same experience. So thank you for doing that.
I think we should shout out Judy Newcomb as well, because she was the person who shepherded this project through. And one of the things I learned from Judy is say what you're doing. Be very clear with your words. And she also said, they don't want to see your face. They want to see your hands.
That's true. And actually, I attended a day or two of the shooting of that. That's one of the first times I was on one of those video sets. And Judy really did keep everything going. But of course, people outside of our world here don't understand. Kenneth comes with just about every single sample done. It is a tremendous amount of work to be prepared for doing this kind of a deep study of a technique. So when you watch, understand that there were hours and hours of work behind that, and that makes it really clear and easy to follow.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth, and I hope we talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye now.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Follow Threads on social media and visit threadsmagazine.com to view show notes for this episode. While you're on the site, check out Threads Insider, our online membership with exclusive access to expert sewing techniques. Until next time, keep on sewing with Threads.